spared, and suddenly the tension between us erupted into something I wasn't prepared for. Ready for Josh's comments, which hung heavy and oppressive in the air, like though no one will ever know that I forcefully swallowed all of the oxygen in the room. I attempted to move, but my feet felt like they were stuck to the floor, and my heart was pounding. Something so definitive in his delivery, as if he had already decided on, in any case, I don't think it's a good idea for us to be together. Eventually, I stumbled and spoke shakily, but even as I did, I wasn't entirely sure. Josh glanced at me as if no one was there, so maybe that's what I meant. Even though I knew I should be rushing away from him, everything in the universe was dragging me towards him. Didn't retreat. On the contrary, he moved closer, and the distance between us vanished completely, and I could sense the heat emanating from his breath and body. My heart thumped in my chest as they mixed with mine, and the air appeared to sizzle with electricity. And I did everything I could to avoid stepping back and ending the spell that had fallen over us. "Are you certain of that?" Josh said in a low, whispered voice, with assurance I hadn't previously observed, "as you've been behaving as though you share my thoughts?" What made me wince at what he said, my cheeks flushed with shame, was that he right? Had I been communicating with him without even recognizing it? The idea made my stomach turn. Knots. I shouldn't have felt this way about him. We were now family. It seemed as though we were so near, but whatever this was could never occur. But Josh's expression indicated me he wasn't considering the implications. He wasn't considering the fact that we lived together, that our parents were married, or that if someone discovered that Josh was just focused on this, it would wreck everything. "I can't," I murmured, unable to ignore him and the intensity of his gaze. I wasn't even sure who I was attempting to persuade, him or myself, but my voice lacked the conviction I had hoped for. Not to be discouraged, Josh lifted a hand and lightly touched my cheek. The gentle touch of my thumb on my flesh was sensitive, but it gave me a start. I didn't move or pull away as my breath caught in my throat. Instead, he leaned his lips inches from mine, and I stood there, my heart pounding. I whispered, "Josh, stop." But even as I spoke it, I wasn't certain if I wanted. There was a part of me yelling for him to listen and to leave. This circumstance to leave before things worsened, but there was another darker area that was curious to see where his lips would go. Hovered so near to me that I could sense his breath's warmth. But he paused as though anticipating my next move. The tension between us the air was so dense that it was difficult to breathe. "No one has to know," he continued. Once more in a kind, almost beseeching tone. "It doesn't have to signify anything. It's simply the phrase 'us, just us' replayed in my head. And for a brief while, I gave it some thought. What if this remained a secret between us and no one ever found out? The idea of us being put up and never being heard from again was alluring. It was so alluring that I nearly leaned in and gave in. But then reality set in and I snapped. "No, we can't," I responded, clearing my head of the fog that had surrounded me. Voice, I stepped back and separated myself from him, establishing a distance. In dire need of, "This isn't right, you know that?" Josh stood for a moment. I could see the frustration on his face as he watched me. He ran a hand through his hair, reflecting the turmoil in his eyes that reflected mine. He sighed deeply, stepping back as though attempting to regain control of. I know he acknowledged that his voice was subdued now, nearly dejected, but I have attempted to ignore this about you, but I am unable to do so. Thinking of you. His honest and unvarnished revelation lingered between us. He had never before spoken aloud or acknowledged what had been boiling beneath the surface. For months, and despite my best efforts to pretend it wasn't real, I couldn't because, in reality, I had been considering him as well. I shook my head, attempting to organize my ideas, but it was ineffective because they were all so jumbled. I responded in a harsher voice this time. "Up too complicated, you have to stop." Whatever this is, Josh clenched his jaw and took another breath. "But we can't." "I understand," he murmured in a tight voice, taking a step back and increasing the distance between us. Won't push anymore, but don't lie to yourself and act like you don't feel it either. His remarks were painful because they were real, and I couldn't lie to myself or to him. There is an indisputable bond between us, but that doesn't imply it was right. I'm not lying. I just need some distance, Josh, I whispered softly, more to persuade myself than to him. Nodded, but his eyes were filled with frustration as he turned and walked that night, which was one of the "it all began" on the wildest, most thrilling, and most private nights of my life. The house was unnaturally silent one Saturday morning, the kind of quietness that made every floorboard sound more intense. I was standing at the kitchen sink, scrubbing the final plates with hands dipped in warm, soapy water from after breakfast. Everyone departed for the day, with Mom and Dad taking part in one of their usual. It wasn't uncommon for me to go on weekend excursions with my stepbrother Josh alone. Us to spend time together alone at home, but today felt different, and I couldn't get rid of since hearing his voice echoing down the stairs a few hours ago, I've had a weird feeling in my stomach. Our once easy relationship has recently become heated due to my attentiveness. Couldn't pinpoint, but it was also impossible to ignore. Perhaps it was because we have lived together for a few years, but we have never been that close. Or perhaps it was I finished drying my hands and thought of something more that wasn't said. Just as Josh emerged at the doorway, leaning nonchalantly against his arms were folded across his chest, and his gaze were fixed on me in a way that made, "Hey," he remarked in a casual tone, but there was an awareness that made my skin prickle. Edge to it. "What are you doing?" I answered, "Just cleaning up," attempting to maintain my tone light, as though I wasn't aware of the tension building while he remained there without answering. Merely watched me right away, his eyes heavy, apparently evaluating me as I moved on. You can tell it's because his focus makes the space feel smaller. Josh remarked, "Just us here today," in a low, nearly too quiet voice. It gave me chills to hear him say it so casually, as if he were merely reporting a truth. I wasn't sure why, but the way his words lingered made me shudder. I nodded, keeping my hands occupied, while I felt something flicker in the back of my mind. Cleaned the counter? Yes, I am aware that having the house to ourselves is pleasant. As if something were about to happen, the room grew silent once more, the kind of silence that crackled with unsaid words. To occur, but hadn't really materialized yet, so I looked at Josh from the corner. He was still standing in the doorway, but his face had altered in front of my eyes. His typical grin vanished, to be replaced with a darker one that made for reasons I didn't entirely understand, his heart began to race before he finally pushed off the doorframe and moved slowly across the kitchen, and I sensed his presence next to me. He was too close before I even looked up, yet I didn't go away. He said, "I'm not sure why you've been acting strange lately." There was tightness beneath the calmer voice. "Is everything all right?" Gazed up at him, surprised by the inquiry, and thought, "What about Josh?" said a low voice. "You haven't spoken to me more than twice in the last week." Laugh, but it lacked humor. Perhaps I was at a loss for words. His speech had that odd undertone once more, as if I had a lump in my throat from something he wasn't telling me, and the air between were getting thicker every second. I began speaking a little shakily, "But I'm not the one who's making things strange, so just express what's on your mind." Josh's eyes never left mine, and for a moment I believed he was about to tell me. However, he took a step closer, his shoulder grazing mine as he leaned to pick up a drink from the counter, and as his arm touched mine, it sent an unexpected shock that made my breath catch and my body temperature increase. Face. What was going on? "You're right," his voice finally said. "I suppose I've just been thinking a lot about the tension that has felt like it was about to boil over between us, but I wasn't sure what to do, because my gut told me to take a step back and put some distance between us. But I was stuck thinking about," I asked in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper, and Josh gave me a fierce glare. The world seems to slow down around us for a time, and although his countenance was unreadable, there was something in you, he said plainly, and the look in his eyes was one I had never seen before. The word lingered between us like a weighty, unavoidable secret. What do you mean? I blinked, my heart thumping in my chest. His eyes never hesitated, and for the first time I could see it plainly in the way he was standing, a bit too close, and the way his voice had fallen as he spoke. I knew it wasn't simply tension. Feeling all week that there was more to it than I was prepared to admit, and he reached out before his fingers grazing my arm once more, and this time the contact persisted. I should have yanked away, said something to ease the tension, but I just stood there, immobile. Sparks flew through my arm as Josh's hand went up it. "Dear Josh," I began, but the abrupt intensity of the situation caused my voice to fade. As he drew closer, his eyes darkened and his breath warmed my ear. He glanced towards the door, paused before leaving, and no one will ever know. He looked back at me in the kitchen, his eyes lingering for a little moment, more than he said, "I'll give you space," in a tone that was almost softer than before. Resigned, but it's not over, and he left me standing after saying that. I was by myself in the kitchen, my heart racing, my head whirling, and I tried to steady myself with shaky breathing and leaned against the counter. But as much as I wanted to think that I knew that distance between us wouldn't make anything easy, since no matter how much room I tried to create. In actuality, this was far from ended, and there was still a lot more to Josh, and I barely had a normal life in the days that followed. Spoke, and the only reason we did so was because the house felt too small, walls encroaching on me as though they were aware of the secret we were keeping. There seemed to be such a heavy tension whenever our paths touched, might shatter at any moment, so I started avoiding him by keeping in my room more. Leaving the house whenever possible or going farther than normal didn't make a difference. Things easier. In fact, I would found myself thinking about him more, reliving the scene in the kitchen where he remarked, "No one would ever find out the way his voice sank." I hated that those thoughts were coming to me, yet a touch had lingered on my flesh. It was a Saturday afternoon that everything changed, and despite my best efforts, I was unable to get rid of them. Our parents were off once more, and I was sitting in the living room, aimlessly changing the stations in an attempt to divert my attention from the home was silent, save for the thoughts that had been bothering me all week. The slight hum of the television and the fact that I hadn't seen Josh all morning made me hope that would remain the case until I heard slow footsteps coming down the stairs. And thoughtful, just like they had been that day in the kitchen, which made my heart skip a beat. Josh walked, and I recognized him before he even entered the threshold. Entered the room, and for a few period, neither of us spoke. He just stood there observing me, and I sensed the tension between us growing more intense, like I'd tried to pretend I didn't see him by concentrating on the TV, but it always did. Felt his eyes burning into the back of my neck before he finally said anything. I didn't look at him about what he said, but I needed to talk. Forceful, but not upset with us, I sighed, tucking myself farther into the couch. Josh and I discussed this, and it's exactly what I'd been avoiding. He has already moved to the far end of the couch and sat down, keeping a safe distance between us, but even that was little to relieve the tension. It seemed as though everyone in the room was holding their breath, waiting for something to. I heard him say softly, "You're lying," his eyes never leaving mine. I clenched my jaw and pretended that nothing of this mattered, but I knew you felt it too. Jaw, attempting to control my feelings, regardless of what I think is incorrect, and you are aware of that, so why is it incorrect that Josh pressed his voice softly but firmly? What's stopping us? We're not even blood relatives, and we're not harming anyone. I experienced a surge of annoyance, not only at him, but also at the circumstance he wasn't grasping the significance of what he was asking, and he didn't know what's halting us. I spoke again, a little harsher than I meant to. Josh, the fact that this would destroy everything for our parents and family. We can't just... He stared at me for a long time, his face blank, as if nothing had happened. "You're scared," he said, leaning forward a little and resting his elbows on his knees. "You're afraid of what this could mean of what?" he remarked in a quiet but confident tone. "We both know that there is something between us, even though it might turn out differently." I opened my tongue to dispute, but the words became lodged in my throat since the reality was that he was correct. I was afraid of what would occur if we went beyond that boundary, fearful of what it would do to us, our loved ones, and everything we've created since. When our parents got married, I was unable to ignore what I had been. Despite my best efforts to ignore it, Josh got up and walked over. He began speaking more quietly towards the window with his back to me. "And I've been thinking a lot about us and how things have changed ever since I understand why you're afraid because my parents got together, but I also know that you cannot simply disregard something or act as though it doesn't exist." I sat there in silence, wondering what I should reply. He was correct, but I'm not asking since that didn't just make things easier, rather, it made it more difficult. Josh kept turning back to me and said, "You have to decide now. I just want you to give it some serious thought, since this isn't going to go away." Yet, regardless of how much distance we placed between us, his remarks deeply and profoundly affected me. Further than I had hoped, since I knew he was correct and this wasn't simply going away, but that didn't mean I was prepared to deal with it. I need time. I need time to work it out. When I finally spoke, my voice was hardly audible above a whisper. Josh nodded, his face softening a little. "Take all the time you need." I'm not leaving. Need. The room fell silent once more, but this time it wasn't as oppressive. We were still tense, but it felt different now that we had both admitted Josh turned to exit the room because there was something we couldn't ignore any longer. He gave me one last look before vanishing through the threshold. "Just keep in mind that," he said quietly, "that no one should ever know." And with that, he was gone, leaving me by myself with my thoughts, my mind racing, and my pulse thumping. In an infinite number of ways. And the most bizarre aspect was that there was still an incredible moment to come. And the days that followed were quiet. Josh granted me the space I requested, but the tension persisted. Constantly present, seething beneath the surface, even when we weren't in, I kept thinking about what he had stated that no one had to in the same room. Discover it was a seductive notion that something so powerful, it's possible for anything deadly to exist in secret without anyone knowing, but such secrets have a method of disintegrating, don't they? One night, I was sitting in my room, staring at I was deep in contemplation when I heard a gentle tap on my door. Skipped a beat, and even before I heard his voice asking, "Can I come in?" I knew who it was. After a moment of hesitation, I answered, "Yeah," in a scarcely audible voice, and Josh entered. After shutting the door, he paused as though he wasn't sure whether to stay or go. But then he came across the room carefully and sat on the edge of my bed, his eyes never leaving. He whispered softly, "Have you thought about it?" As I nodded my throat. Indeed, if I was being completely honest, I had given it too much thought. All that could go wrong, and how our entire existence could be destroyed, but I had also considered how his words had lingered, and how his touch had felt. Long after he finished speaking, Josh extended his hand and brushed my mind against mine, and I froze for a second, but I didn't yank his. His fingers coiled around mine, and I felt a chill from the warmth of his skin. Although it seemed like such a modest gesture, to me it bore the weight of he said in a quiet voice, "Everything we weren't saying, no one ever needs to know." But I gazed at him, my heart racing, and he insisted that it was just the two of us. Loudly, and I was certain he could hear it. The conflict persisted, and I was afraid of what we were taking a chance on. But there was also something more that was dragging me in his direction, despite my best efforts to resist it without. At first, it was barely perceptible that I was leaning in, but it was sufficient to bridge the distance between us. Josh's breath caught, and I sensed the tension building once more. But this time, It was the kind of tension that made me want to watch where this would go between our lips rather than the kind that made me want to run. The air between us was sizzling with energy as we hovered just inches apart. Felt the pressure of the situation, as if everything depended on it. But before I could stop myself, I initially tentative. The kiss was gentle as we closed the distance, as if we were testing the seas, uncertain of what this signified. But Josh's hand slipped slowly as it deepened. The world appeared to disappear as they pulled me closer, up to the back of my neck. For that little instant, it was just the two of us. No parents, no repercussions, no fear. Entangled in an irreversible moment, and when we eventually separated as I stared at him, my head whirling, my breaths ragged, and reality crashed back in. We had crossed a boundary that I had vowed to myself we wouldn't, and now that I started, but the words wouldn't flow because I wasn't sure what would happen next. Couldn't think of anything to say. Josh's expression as he glanced at me, he repeated the unreadable phrase, "No one will ever find out," as though that could make everything seem well. Although I wasn't entirely certain because, despite our best efforts to maintain this secret, secrets have a way of coming out. I knew this in my heart. We couldn't keep it a secret forever, so I murmured, "I don't know if I can do this." Josh's fingers left mine as my voice faltered, and the distance between us seemed. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair, appearing to be torn between two sides. He whispered to me, "I don't want to lose you," and the vulnerability in his. I was surprised by the voice, but if you're not ready, I'll back off. It was the final. For a little while, I was unsure of how to react to what he had said. Wished to concur that this was a horrible idea and that we should stop before. Although it went too far, the part of me that had kissed him didn't want to. Finally, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just need time to let go." Josh nodded, his face softening, and said, "I'll wait." He got up and gave me a final gaze before turning and heading for the door, but before he did so, he gave me one last look. He smiled bittersweetly and continued, "I meant what I said," adding that nobody would never learn about it, but it doesn't mean you have to keep it to yourself. He was gone, and I was left to bear the burden of everything that had just occurred. My heart continued to race. My mind was racing with ideas and feelings I was unable to comprehend, even though I knew this was far from done. The days after that kiss were a haze, and I made an effort to act as though nothing had occurred, as though Josh and I had not passed a boundary that we were both unable to reverse. However, every time I saw him, and we were in the same room, the recollection was impossible. Of that kiss returned with a vengeance, and Josh was exerting pressure on me as a result of our previous actions. He had vowed to give me room, but the strain had not, if anything, decreased. The pressure between us seemed to be increasing, and it seemed more strong now. I could tell by the way he looked at me when he believed I wasn't paying that neither of us understood how to release. Focus, the way his fingers would linger a bit too long, and the way his eyes would lightly touch mine, igniting a fire inside of me that I couldn't ignore. I knew I should be attempting to determine how to put things right and how to take a step back, but I wasn't sure what to do. Whatever this was before it got out of hand, each time I considered approaching him about putting an end to this for the fact that I didn't want to let go yet was the wonderful thing that kept me back. I couldn't sleep that night since my mind was racing with ideas, so I ended up lying in bed and staring up at the ceiling. Of Josh's kiss, what it meant, and what it may signify now. Despite my best efforts to tell myself otherwise, I couldn't get rid of the notion that our relationship wasn't done. Otherwise, and then, seemingly at the same moment, my heart gently knocked on my door, sprang up my throat. Before I could hear his voice, I knew it was Josh. "Can I come in?" he requested in a low, almost timid voice, and I paused for a second, conflicted about inviting him in or telling him to go, but ultimately I couldn't. Yeah, I muttered as I forced myself to shove him away, and the door creaked open. When Josh entered, his face partially obscured by the hallway's low light. He appeared different tonight, softer and more susceptible, as if the burden of our past interactions were bearing down on him with equal vigor as it was on me. And after shutting the door, he stood there for a while. Simply, I could see the conflict as he watched me with his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. The same struggle that had been going on inside of me since that day in the kitchen kept me awake in his eyes. "I've been thinking about us, about everything," he said, his voice just above a whisper. And I sat up, tugging the "me too," I murmured, pulling my blanket more about me as my heart thumped in my chest. Josh gently moved closer, his gaze never leaving mine. His voice was tight with passion as he added, "I don't want to ruin things, but I can't. I've tried to stop thinking about you, but it won't go away." I felt my chest. I had been telling myself the same thing repeatedly, and his comments made me clench. Hearing him say it aloud made it all worthwhile, even if I was trying to tell myself that this was only a phase that would pass. Feels so much more genuine that I'm at a loss for what to do. I acknowledged that my voice is wobbly. I wanted to wreck everything, but I couldn't finish the statement, so I drifted off. Josh realized that he always did, so he sat on the bed's edge, maintaining a slight but noticeable gap between. His hand was resting on the blanket near enough to mine for me to feel his skin warmth, but far enough away that we may stop since the touch wasn't unintentional. He murmured softly through his, "If that's what you want, I don't want to push you into something you're not," she said reluctantly, prepared for. I stared at him, my pulse pounding at the earnestness of his tone. Was providing me with an opportunity to leave this situation before it got out of control. Control, but the issue was that I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave. I barely made my voice heard as I muttered what I wanted. But I know that whatever, I'm not sure how to handle Josh's hand, and this isn't going away. Moved, then cautiously and slowly, till his fingertips touched me. Was really cautious and kind. Thanks for watching.